Hey, greetings and welcome to April 16th. This is going to be the last lecture of the day, and again, I want to address the question: where do we go from here? We're leaning into this entire section over the next week and a half, looking at the systemic issues that have been created, that 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 establish the kind of environment out of which injustice flourishes. We're going to be talking about things like education, incarceration, housing, access to healthcare, food deserts. All of these are topics we're going to be dealing with over the course of the next week and a half. All of them, I think, matter because each of them in some way perpetuates the racial injustices and inequalities that make racial reconciliation very difficult. But you and I face an issue, a challenge, what we've been addressing in this set of lectures. So we're not on the same page. Even within the church, some folks would say racial reconciliation really isn't an issue at all. Not something that I'm interested in addressing. We had the Civil Rights Act. People have been free. We had a black president. Well, they'll say things like that. We know that. We've been talking about that throughout this course. So there's going to be some that will just immediately on the front end say that this isn't really a deal. That people need to get over themselves. They need to get past their prejudices. They need to be done with their race cards, and we just need to move on. And we can't reconcile because people keep throwing race in our faces. That's what some will suggest. Even as we talk about affirmative action, what that created and the tensions that exist as a result of that throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s, I think becomes a part of that conversation. But so there's going to be some who suggest this isn't a deal, and it's not an issue that we need to necessarily deal with constantly. But even within our congregations, amongst those who do think it's a deal, the question of how do we proceed and where do we go from here? How do we tackle this? What do we do with it? That goes to the divide that we've been talking about throughout this lecture set. Some suggesting it's about personal, individual moral responsibility, while others suggest that it has to do with systemic injustices and recognizing the challenges that both of those hold. For those who tend to lean towards personal moral responsibility, they're going to say that we can't control the political and economic and the educational systems that create. That's not the job of the church. The job of the church is to put person in front of person, life on life, people seeking forgiveness, asking for forgiveness, healing relationships, people getting saved, and even within the black communities, predominantly underprivileged black communities. Some will in the church, both whites and blacks, would suggest that the problem isn't systemic. It's moral. It's personally volitional. The problem is that people in those underdeveloped, underserved communities continue to make bad decisions. And those bad decisions sabotage their well-being, sabotage the equality and the justice that should be theirs. It sabotages even their ability to exist in harmonious relationships with others. Because their bad decisions continue to perpetuate cycles of violence, drug use, gang affiliation, failure to excel in education, economic disparity, debt, eviction, all of those, if people would be trained to make better decisions, their conditions would improve, justice would be recognized, and trust would be established so that we could reconcile together. We could heal the wounds that have divided us for so long. And we can see this throughout. This is the idea of Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington, from our presentations, took the idea that if blacks sought moral and educational improvement, economic improvement, they could be trusted by whites, whites would trust blacks, and we would heal the divide. He was a minimal threat because of this emphasis that it placed upon the black person to exercise moral fortitude and self-improvement. And we see this even within strains of the African American church, where the emphasis is solely on one's individual moral responsibility. And in terms of that, the black church has been an ally because it speaks about moral restraint and moral self-improvement within black communities. And again, I don't want to dismiss the importance of this, because as we looked at lecture 1, it's a both and, not an either or. But in our congregations, people will lean typically either or. We'll see this in people's language of stop blaming the system, stop playing the race card, work yourself out of your problems. And this is a land of equal opportunity. If you work hard enough, you can become and do whatever you want to do. This is the suggestion, this is the assumption behind this individually focused, moral volitional stance. Now, part of this is born out of what's called the Protestant work ethic, which is about this idea of moral self-improvement. And there was a study done once at one point by a theologian that suggested that Christianity typically emerged out of groups of underserved, underprivileged people who then, when they became Christians, changed their disciplines and their practices and improved their conditions, their well-being, their economic status. They actually rose to another level of economic power and privilege, and then it institutionalized. They would suggest that the Protestant moral work ethic creates that system. There's a part of that that influences the level of the church, the responsibility on the individual. Again, I don't want to dismiss the importance, but I want to hold that in tension with the recognition that there is another group of people in our churches that will say, well, that's great and all, but how does one morally improve when the conditions of their living are so destitute that they live in survival mode or desperation? How do we improve when people, and there's a lot of work being done currently about what's called inherited trauma? How do people improve when we're not even sure what it means or how deeply rooted the inherited traumas of the past, at even a genetic level potentially, could be influencing, impacting people's capacity to make certain moral decisions? How do we tell the person to pull up your moral bootstraps when they can't even afford shoelaces? How do we tell people to excel in education when they live in a food desert and we understand the correlation between good nutrition and good educational outcomes? So there's going to be a group of people that would want to suggest that in order to improve equality, justice, and ultimately bring reconciliation by correcting those injustices, we've got to do it at a systemic level. And what I want to suggest to us is that both are right. Both perspectives, postures, are taking seriously the human condition. Because in the human condition, we are both morally responsible as individuals for the decisions that we make, and a part of an environment and atmosphere that serves as the context out of which those decisions come. And we can't simply blame the system for the bad decisions we're making, but we have to understand that certain conditions and environments create the context out of which assumptions and decisions are continually made. So what does it look like for the church to take seriously both? To preach the kind of gospel that convicts people of sin, but also empowers people to address the systemic injustices and inequalities that create the divides that make reconciliation almost difficult, almost impossible. So what I want to invite us to do is consider that as we move through the systemic concerns into this next set of lectures throughout this next week, and then as we move into that last week where we really begin to build this roadmap towards reconciliation, or at least begin to think about what the roadmaps could look like. Because I think there's probably multiple roadmaps. And what would it look like for the church to take seriously its role in reforming unjust systems, as it also cares deeply about the moral decisions that people are making each and every day? So that's my question, that's my invitation for you to consider as we move into our conversation on Zoom on Friday, and then into the lectures next week.